The community center was packed, sweat and tension hanging in the air so thick you could almost taste it. TV cameras hummed, neighbors whispered, and at the front of the room stood Delilah, expensive suit, lawyer at her side, charts and accusations ready to bury me once and for all. She raised her voice like a general declaring war. "We are victims of economic terrorism." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even her allies shifted uneasily. But before the room could settle, an 8-year-old girl raised her hand. Little Sophie Morgan, sitting in the third row, asked in the blunt honesty only a child can manage, "Why were you mean about Mr. Marcus's grandpa's boat? My dad says it still works good." Silence. Cameras zoomed in. Parents stared. Delilah smirked and answered, dripping with condescension. "Sweetie, some people just don't understand community standards." The crowd erupted in shocked gasps. In that instant, everyone finally saw her for what she was. That's when I stood, folder in hand, and revealed the truth that would flip the entire community against her. Proof the HOA never had jurisdiction over my marina at all. That single moment changed everything. And if you want to know exactly how this small coastal town turned a nightmare HOA battle into a victory for neighbors and families, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now, and don't forget to hit the bell icon so you don't miss the full story. The summer air in Willowbrook shores carried the familiar blend of salt, diesel, and pine sap drifting down from the Carolina marshes. But that morning, something else spoiled the breeze, the sharp edge of disdain from Delilah Thornfield. She arrived at my dock in her usual power outfit, navy blazer pressed so stiff you could shave with the creases, clipboard clutched like a knight's shield, lips pursed as though a sour taste lingered permanently on her tongue. Behind her, sunlight danced on the water, reflecting against the hull of my late father's boat, a 1987 Boston whaler. Paint faded, trim weathered, but engine still loyal and true. To me, it wasn't a boat. It was legacy. To Delilah, it was trash. "Mr. Caldwell," she began, not even looking me in the eye, "this thing tied to your dock is an eyesore. It violates our community's aesthetics. Willowbrook Shores is built on standards, and frankly, this doesn't meet them." Her voice carried the kind of venom people like her reserved for anything that threatened their vision of perfection. I'd spent years fixing marine diesels in Charleston, men and women bringing me engines in pieces after bad weather, salt corrosion, or worse. I'd seen real wrecks. My father's boat was not one of them. Still, I smiled and said simply, "I'll handle it." She smirked, clearly interpreting compliance. What she didn't know, what none of them realized, was that the very dock she stood on, the marina beneath her shiny pumps, belonged to me. The marina was mine, not the HOA's. It had been my grandfather's before me, built in 1960 with creosote pilings that would outlast generations. The HOA might control the cul-de-sacs, the hedges trimmed to regulation height, and the number of lawn ornaments per square yard. But the Caldwell Marina? That was outside their reach. And yet, they'd forgotten, or maybe never cared, who truly held the keys to why Lowbrook Shores' lifeline. Because here's the truth. The nearest full-service marina sits 24 miles away. Slip rentals there go for $400 a month, and fuel prices bleed boaters dry. My family had always charged $150, offering fair prices and convenience because that's what neighbors do. Without this marina, Willowbrook Shores was a prison with water views and no water access. But Delilah didn't see it that way. To her, my father's boat was trashy, and to the HOA board, rules mattered more than history, more than family, more than community itself. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I stayed calm, because in that moment I realized something profound. The very people sneering down at my heritage depended entirely on it. My dock, my slips, my services. They thought they had leverage over me. The truth was, I had all the leverage in the world. And that's where this story really begins. One woman's obsession with control colliding with 3 generations of stubborn saltwater running through my veins. 3 weeks earlier, I had sat beside my father in a sterile hospital room as lung cancer stole his final breaths. His calloused hands, hands that had built, repaired, and steered boats through storms, went still. He was 52, too young. I inherited more than land. I inherited responsibility. 3 acres of prime coastline, a marina with 6 slips, and a promise passed down since my grandfather's time that our docks would always serve Willowbrook families. Delilah Thornfield didn't know it yet, but when she insulted my father's memory, she declared war, and I wasn't about to lose. It didn't take long for Delilah to escalate. She came back a week later with 2 other board members in tow, armed with official HOA violation notices. Each one was stamped and signed like the law itself had spoken. The offense? Unsightly marine vessel visible from public thoroughfare. Must be removed within 14 days or face fines up to $250 per day. She read it out loud with relish, as though savoring every syllable. I nodded politely again, folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket. I could feel my father laughing in the back of my mind. Robert Caldwell had always said the HOA was a pack of jackals. They'll never understand watermen, he used to say. They're too busy measuring lawns to measure character. Delilah thought she had me cornered. What she didn't realize was that while the HOA could dictate mailbox colors and driveway widths, they had no jurisdiction over the marina. My grandfather had ensured that back in 1960, and county records confirmed it. The HOA boundary lines stopped short. The marina was sovereign Caldwell property. Still, I let her keep coming. I let her pile violation after violation. I let her whisper to neighbors about how my derelict boat dragged down property values. I let her attorney send threatening letters about liens and fines, because every piece of paper they stacked against me was another piece of evidence I could later set on fire, in front of the very people they claimed to represent. Meanwhile, the community didn't see the war brewing. They just saw convenience. They rented slips at my dock, filled tanks at my pumps, bought bait from my shack, and lived their waterfront dreams without realizing that all of it was hanging by a thread. My thread. The turning point came on a Saturday afternoon. I'd just finished replacing a corroded impeller for one of my slip renters when Captain Blackwood, a grizzled veteran with more sea stories than anyone else on this coast, leaned over and said, "Marcus, you gonna let them do this to you? Your daddy's boat? That marina your granddaddy built? You got more power here than you realize." I already knew it, but hearing it from him, in that gravelly voice, made me commit. The plan was simple. Show the community exactly what life looked like without the Caldwell Marina. If Delilah wanted to play power games, fine. I'd show her what real power was. So one Friday evening, with the sky bleeding orange over the marsh, I locked the marina gates, posted a sign, closed until further notice. Pumps shut down, slips chained, services halted. The silence that fell over the waterfront that night was deafening. By Saturday morning, panic set in. Boaters needing fuel were stranded. Visiting regatta participants discovered they had no slips. Families scheduled for weekend outings scrambled for alternatives that didn't exist. The nearest marina was 24 miles away, and their waiting lists stretched half a year. Restaurants on the waterfront sat empty without weekend boat traffic. By Sunday afternoon, chaos reigned. And by Monday, every single one of my neighbors knew the truth. Delilah Thornfield might run the HOA, but I ran Willowbrook Shores. By Monday morning, the community center parking lot looked like a regatta staging area gone wrong. Pickup trucks with empty trailers, SUVs loaded with coolers and life jackets, even golf carts normally used for lazy neighborhood cruises, all jammed together in confusion. The marina closure had spread panic faster than a hurricane warning. People milled around in clusters, waving their arms, muttering curses, some clutching their phones like lifelines as they called every marina from Charleston to Myrtle Beach, only to hear the same thing. No slips available, closest opening in 6 months. And through it all, Delilah Thornfield stood tall, or at least she tried to. She wore a white sundress that morning, oversized sunglasses shielding her eyes, but even from across the parking lot, I could see the nervous twitch in her jaw. She was telling anyone who'd listen that the situation was under control and that the HOA had remedies for non-compliant residents. But her words rang hollow. Everyone knew that what had shut down Willowbrook Shores wasn't a storm or mechanical failure. It was me. I didn't show up at the community center right away. No, I let the tension build. Like a fisherman waiting for a strike, you don't jerk the line too early. You wait until the fish swallows the hook. By late morning, a crowd of at least 70 people had gathered. Some were renters of my slips, furious that their boats were trapped behind chains. Others were homeowners who didn't even own boats but were livid that the restaurants, bars, and shops along the waterfront had lost weekend business. Property values, the sacred idol of Willowbrook Shores, were now at risk. And if there was one thing guaranteed to shake this neighborhood, it was the faintest whiff of financial loss. I arrived just before noon. I didn't sneak in quietly. I drove Dad's old pickup, the one with a dented fender and faded paint, pulling into the lot with a growl that turned heads. When I stepped out, the murmurs stopped. People knew. Even before I spoke, they knew. Marcus! Captain Blackwood's gravelly voice carried over the crowd. He'd stationed himself near the steps of the community center, arms crossed, eyes gleaming like he'd been waiting for this showdown for years. About time you showed up. Folks got questions. I nodded, slow and steady, like I had all the time in the world. I imagine they do. Delilah descended the steps like a queen about to scold a rebellious subject. Mr. Caldwell, she said, voice sharp enough to cut rope, this childish stunt has gone on long enough. You will remove your boat, and you will reopen the marina immediately, or the HOA will pursue every legal remedy available. Her words rippled through the crowd, but they didn't land the way she expected. People shifted uncomfortably. A man in fishing shorts muttered, "Legal remedies don't fill gas tanks." A woman with a toddler on her hips snapped, "What about our regatta next weekend? Without the marina, it's canceled." Delilah raised her chin, about to retort, but I cut her off, not with anger, with calm, deliberate truth. "You all know me," I began, my voice steady, but loud enough to carry. "My family's been here since before Willowbrook Shores had paved streets. My grandfather built that marina in 1960 because he knew this community would need it. My father kept it running for decades. And I've been the one fixing your engines, fueling your boats, and renting you slips for prices half of what Charleston charges. That marina isn't just wood and water. It's survival. It's legacy." I paused, scanning the faces. Some looked guilty, others ashamed. More than a few looked downright angry, but not at me. At Delilah. "Now," I continued, pulling the folded HOA violation notice from my pocket, "this is what I got in return." I held it up for everyone to see. A piece of paper calling my father's boat, my inheritance, trash, an eyesore, a violation of aesthetic standards. I spat the last two words like they were rotten fish. Tell me something, neighbors. How many of you were consulted about these standards? How many of you voted on whether my boat or anyone else's has the right to exist here? Murmurs grew louder. A few hands even shot up, not in agreement, but in anger at the HOA. Delilah's voice wavered. The board? I cut in. Or you, Delilah, because from where I stand, this isn't about aesthetics. This is about control. And the moment you decided to insult my father's memory, you turned this into something bigger than a boat. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged, like air before a storm. Even children sensed the tension. An 8-year-old girl tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Why is Mrs. Delilah so mean?" The crowd erupted, not with cheers or boos, but with raw, unfiltered conversation. Shouts of "He's right" clashed with "We need order." Neighbors who'd smiled at each other for years now glared like enemies across a battlefield. And me? I stood there calm as ever, knowing the hook was set. Because it didn't matter what Delilah said next. The truth was already out. She could not control the one thing that held this community together, the Caldwell Marina. And if they wanted it back, they'd have to decide whose side they were really on. The HOA board had scheduled an emergency meeting that same evening, and the air around the community center was thick with anticipation. Word spread faster than a king mackerel chasing baitfish. Every homeowner in Willowbrook Shores seemed to show up, retirees in shit, pastel polos, young families juggling kids in coolers, salty old captains smelling of diesel and sunscreen. Even the high schoolers, usually too cool for anything HOA-related, lingered at the edges, whispering about how their summer jobs at the marina were on the line. I took my time walking in, letting the murmur of voices wash over me. Each step on those wooden floors carried the weight of 3 generations, and I wanted everyone in that room to feel it. The Caldwell name wasn't just a signature on a deed. It was the foundation under their feet. Delilah sat at the head of the long table, flanked by 6 other board members. She looked every bit the part of the self-appointed monarch, hair lacquered into perfection, lips pursed, eyes blazing with the kind of fury only wounded pride can conjure. Her blazer was crisp, her heels tapped with authority, but I noticed the faintest tremble in her hand as she rearranged her papers. She was losing control, and she knew it. The meeting opened with formalities, as if Robert's rules of order could hide the fact that the community was teetering on collapse. Treasurer Margaret Thompson read out the agenda, her voice shaking only slightly. Item 1. Discussion regarding the Caldwell Marina closure and subsequent community impact. The crowd didn't wait. Voices erupted immediately. 3 restaurants closed early on Saturday because no one could dock. I've got 10 guests flying in this weekend. They rented boats. Where am I supposed to put them? My husband's been on the water here for 20 years. This is the first time I've seen him considering selling because of HOA nonsense. Delilah slammed her gavel, the sharp crack echoing through the room. Order! This meeting will proceed in an organized fashion, or it will be adjourned. Her threat hung in the air, but it only deepened the resentment simmering in the room. That's when Captain Blackwood stood. He didn't need a microphone. His voice was salt water and grit, carrying through every corner. This community don't run without that marina. Never has, never will. Caldwell built it. Caldwell kept it alive. And Caldwell's the only reason any of us can call this a waterfront paradise. You shut him down. You shut us all down. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous, defiant. People stomped their feet, clapped, whistled. Even teenagers joined in, chanting, "Reopen! Reopen!" Delilah's face flushed crimson. She lifted the gavel again but couldn't be heard over the roar. When the noise finally subsided, she leaned forward, her voice icy. This board exists to preserve property values. Trashy, outdated vessels on private docks drive those values down. If we allow one resident to flaunt the standards, what's to stop others from cluttering our shoreline with rusting junk? That was my cue. I rose slowly from the back row, the violation notice still folded in my pocket like a scar. You call it trash. I call it history. My father's boat has carried generations through storms, caught fish that fed families, and taught half the kids here how to cast a line. You want to erase that because the paint's chipped? Tell me, Delilah, do you also plan on repainting the sunset because it doesn't match your color palette? The laughter that followed cracked her composure. Even some board members smirked. But I wasn't finished. I walked down the aisle until I stood right in front of her table. You want to talk about property values? Let's. In the 3 days since I locked the marina, businesses have lost thousands. Rentals have been canceled. Home buyers are second-guessing contracts. And why? Because one person decided her opinion mattered more than an entire community's survival. That's not preservation. That's sabotage. Gasp. Hiss nods, murmurs. Delilah's allies shrank in their seats. I turned to the crowd. You all trusted me with your boats because you knew I'd treat them like my own. I never charged more than I had to, even when gas prices spiked. I kept the docks safe, the lights on, and the slips affordable. Did the HOA ever ask your opinion on that? Did they ever vote on whether shutting me down was in your best interest? No, because this was never about the community. This was about power. The room vibrated with agreement. Margaret Thompson set down her pen and folded her arms, no longer pretending neutrality. Delilah, desperate, tried to pivot. The board has authority under Section 8, subsection 14 of the bylaws. Broke bylaws don't put gas in tanks, someone shouted. Or fish on dinner plates, another yelled. The eruption that followed was louder than before, drowning out any trace of Delilah's authority. Parents hoisted toddlers on their hips. Retirees banged canes on the floor. Even skeptical homeowners who'd once sided with Delilah now looked around and realized they were outnumbered. Finally, Commissioner Rodriguez, who'd been quietly observing in the back, stood and raised a hand. Her presence carried weight. She wasn't just a guest. She was a county commissioner with real power beyond this HOA charade. I've seen a lot of disputes, she said, her voice calm but firm. But I've never seen a community so willing to fracture itself over something that should unite it. The question isn't whether Mr. Caldwell's boat is an eyesore. The question is whether Willowbrook Shores values cooperation more than control. And just like that, the tide turned. The silence after Commissioner Rodriguez's words felt heavier than any storm cloud I'd ever seen roll over the bay. It wasn't just quiet, it was a moment of collective reckoning. Neighbors looked at one another, some ashamed, others defiant, all of them realizing that this wasn't really about a boat or a marina anymore. It was about what kind of community Willowbrook Shores wanted to be. Delilah tried to seize back control. She leaned forward, voice sharpened like a fishhook. Commissioner, with respect, this is a private matter. The board has every legal right to enforce our bylaws without interference from county officials. Mr. Caldwell was given notice. He refused to comply. End of story. But it wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. Captain Blackwood shot up again, not bothering with pleasantries. End of story? You're out of your damn mind, Delilah. The Caldwell Marina ain't some hobby. It's the artery that keeps this place alive. You cut it off, you bleed out the whole community. That's the real end of the story. Applause thundered again, louder this time, like waves smashing against a seawall. People were no longer whispering doubts. They were shouting demands. Reopen the marina! Step down, Delilah. We didn't vote for this. Delilah's veneer cracked. Her voice rose higher, thinner, almost screeching. Do you people not understand? Property values will plummet if we allow dilapidated relics to... I cut her off. Funny thing about values, they're not just numbers on a spreadsheet. They're memories, traditions, trust. My father's boat has more value in its rust than your glass palace does in all its shine. And if you think buyers care more about paint chips than about having a marina within walking distance, you're the one who doesn't understand real estate. That stung. Heads turned toward Margaret Thompson, the treasurer and part-time realtor, who had been sitting silently but now looked distinctly uncomfortable under the weight of Delilah's words. She cleared her throat, voice measured but steady. Marcus is right. I've already had 2 potential buyers call me since the marina closed, asking whether this community had reliable water access. When I couldn't give them a clear answer, both said they'd look elsewhere. If we lose this marina, we lose marketability, period. The effect was nuclear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Delilah's staunchest supporters, wealthy homeowners who usually parroted her every word, shifted uneasily. Real estate value wasn't just a talking point, it was their gospel. I pressed forward, sensing the shift. You see, closing the marina doesn't protect this community. It cripples it. And the only person who benefits from that is sitting right there with a gavel in her hand. All eyes returned to Delilah. Her cheeks flamed red. This is slander, she barked, voice cracking. The board's decisions are made collectively. But nobody believed her anymore. From the back, a voice shouted, Then let's vote collectively. It was like a spark hitting dry tinder. The room erupted with chants. Vote! 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 Commissioner Rodriguez raised her hand again, and the noise simmered into uneasy silence. I can't force an HOA to vote tonight, she said carefully. But I can remind you that every resident here is entitled to petition for a special election under your own bylaws. And if enough of you sign that petition, this board will have no choice but to face accountability. That did it. The tide wasn't just turning, it was crashing down on Delilah's empire. Neighbors began whispering to one another, already plotting, already calculating signatures. Her carefully constructed authority was dissolving faster than sugar in salt water. Delilah saw it too. Her hands trembled as she tried to shuffle her papers, desperate to restore order. This meeting is adjourned, she snapped, slamming the gavel, but nobody moved. For the first time since she seized control of Willowbrook Shores, Delilah realized that the gavel only worked if people respected it. And tonight, respect had abandoned her. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she and the board could hear, though I knew the microphones would carry it. Delilah, you wanted to erase my father's legacy to make yourself look powerful. But here's the thing about marinas. You can't control the tide. And right now, the tide's turning against you. Her eyes burned with hatred, but also fear. Fear of losing not just control, but reputation, influence, maybe even her career. The crowd surged again, this time with energy that couldn't be contained. Neighbors started drafting petitions right there in the community center, borrowing pens, scribbling signatures on scraps of paper. It was messy, chaotic, but beautiful. Democracy reborn on the same planks where it had nearly been strangled. As I watched the movement swell, I thought of my father, of his weathered hands guiding the rudder, of his quiet wisdom about currents and storms. He used to say, "The sea don't care about pride, Marcus. You fight it, you lose. You respect it, you survive." Delilah had fought the tide, and tonight she was losing. By the time the gavel's echo faded, Delilah Thornfield looked like a captain clinging to a sinking ship. Her once impenetrable confidence had cracked wide open, and every eye in that room was watching her go under. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were currents, pulling neighbors into a tide she could no longer control. I stood near the center, not saying much, just letting the momentum gather. Sometimes the best move is simply to hold the wheel steady and let the storm carry you where you need to go. "Petition sheets," someone shouted. "We need official petition sheets." Margaret Thompson, the treasurer who had just exposed Delhi Law's bluff, stepped forward. She held up a clipboard with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment without admitting it to herself. "Bylaw Section 4.3, she announced, her voice surprisingly loud. "Special elections can be triggered if 30% of residents sign a petition. We've got 200 households. That means we need 60 signatures. Tonight." A murmur swept through the crowd. 60 signatures. In a room with over 100 people, it suddenly felt less like rebellion and more like inevitability. Delilah pounded the gavel again. "You can't just—" But Captain Blackwood's voice boomed over hers. "Oh, we can, and we will. You think we're afraid of ink on paper? Lady, we've weathered hurricanes stronger than you. Hand me that clipboard, Margaret." He strode down the aisle like a general at the head of an army, snatched the petition sheet, and scrawled his name across the top in giant block letters. He turned and held it up like a flag. "One down. 59 to go. Who's next?" The rush was immediate. Neighbors lined up, some practically shoving each other to get a pen. Young parents with kids tugging at their sleeves. Retired couples who'd lived in Willowbrook Shores since before the HOA even existed. Even renters who technically couldn't vote whispered their support and offered to help gather names. Delilah's face drained of color. "This is illegal," she stammered, voice cracking. "This isn't how governance works. You people are being manipulated." A voice from the back cut her down like a knife. "No, Delilah. We're finally free of being manipulated by you." It was Nancy Hargrave, one of Delilah's closest allies until now. Her defection was like a crack spreading across ice. If Nancy could turn, anyone could. Delilah tried to pivot, plastering on a brittle smile. "Nancy, darling, I understand you're upset, but—" "No," Nancy said sharply. "You don't understand. You never have. We supported you because we thought you cared about Willowbrook. But it turns out you only care about control. Marcus has done more for this community in 3 weeks than you've done in 3 years." That landed like cannon fire. The petition line grew longer, snaking through the rows of folding chairs. The sound of pens scratching paper became a kind of drumbeat, steady, relentless. Every signature was another plank nailed into Delilah's political coffin. I stayed back, resisting the urge to gloat. This wasn't about me proving her wrong. It was about my father's legacy, about neighbors realizing their voices mattered. I watched an older man I barely knew, Mr. Jenkins from the cul-de-sac, sign the sheet with trembling hands. He leaned toward me afterward and whispered, "Your dad used to fix my skiff for free when I couldn't afford it. This is for him." I swallowed hard, emotions swelling in my chest. Delilah, meanwhile, spiraled further. She stormed toward Margaret, trying to snatch the petition back. "Give me that," she hissed. Margaret pulled away, steel in her eyes. "Touch this clipboard and I'll call Sheriff Santos myself. This is lawful procedure and you know it." The crowd erupted in boos. Someone shouted, "Resign already!" Another voice added, "Pack your bags, Delilah." She spun in a circle looking for allies, but found only crossed arms and stony faces. Even her husband, sitting stiffly in the second row, avoided her gaze. The petition filled faster than anyone expected. In less than 20 minutes, Margaret lifted the clipboard triumphantly. 63 signatures, verified residents. The roar that followed shook the rafters. Some people clapped, others whistled, others stomped their feet like they were at a concert. For the first time in years, the community center wasn't filled with fear or silence. It was filled with hope. Delilah's final attempt at control was almost pitiful. She raised her chin, voice trembling. This, this is mob rule. You'll regret this when your property values collapse, when outsiders take over, when chaos reigns. But her words no longer carried weight. Commissioner Rodriguez stepped forward, taking the clipboard. By law, this petition is valid. A special election will be scheduled within 30 days. Until then, the board remains seated. But let's be clear. Your authority has been challenged by your own neighbors. The tide is shifting, Mrs. Thornfield. The crowd cheered again. Delilah sank into her chair, staring at the floor as if it might swallow her whole. For a woman who once thought she ruled Willowbrook Shores like a queen, the fall was brutal, public, and irreversible. As people celebrated, Captain Blackwood clapped me on the shoulder. You didn't just save your father's boat tonight, Marcus. You saved the soul of this place. I looked around the room, at the kids smiling, the neighbors shaking hands, the newfound unity sparking like electricity, and realized he was right. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The real storm was still coming. The meeting ended in a blur of cheers, papers shuffling, and neighbors lingering in clusters like they'd just witnessed history, and maybe they had. But as the room emptied, the air didn't relax the way you'd expect after such a victory. Instead, it carried a heavy charge, like the hush before lightning splits the sky. I lingered near the back, rolling the gavel's last echo in my mind. Delilah had been wounded, yes, but a wounded predator can be the most dangerous kind. Captain Blackwood walked beside me as we stepped out into the humid night air. The cicadas hummed their eternal chorus, and the marina lights flickered across the water like tiny lanterns guiding ships home. He pulled a cigar from his shirt pocket, rolled it between his fingers, and gave me a look. Don't get too comfortable, son. She ain't the type to lick her wounds and go quietly. She'll come back harder. I know, I said. My eyes drifted toward my father's boat, tied neatly at my private dock. Its silhouette cut against the moonlit water, weathered but strong, like the old man who'd cared for it. But so will we. The next morning, the retaliation began. Delilah's minions, or at least the few who hadn't defected, started a smear campaign. They whispered about how I was profiting off the community with my marina, how I was exploiting grief to get sympathy. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, accusing me of tax evasion, of neglecting safety regulations, even of harboring unregistered boats. Lies stacked on lies, printed in bold letters and slipped under front doors like poison. But here's the thing about lies in a small community. They don't travel far before hitting the wall of truth. My neighbors knew me. They'd seen me hauling nets with my dad, fixing outboard engines for free, giving kids rides on summer evenings just to watch their faces light up. The smear campaign fizzled almost as quickly as it started. Still, it was proof. Delilah wasn't done. By the third day, she tried a new angle. Legal threats. I received a thick envelope delivered by certified mail. Inside was a cease and desist order drafted by some law firm in Raleigh, demanding that I shut down the marina for safety and compliance reasons. It cited obscure bylaws, zoning disputes, and even environmental concerns. The message was clear. If she couldn't win with politics, she'd bury me under paper. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the documents, feeling the old ache of loss creep up my spine. My father had fought his battles with wrenches and salt water, not lawyers and bureaucrats. I felt out of my depth until I remembered something he once told me while teaching me how to splice a rope. Marcus, he'd said, his hands calloused and sure, you don't have to know everything. You just have to know who to call. So I called. First, I called Margaret Thompson. She showed up with a binder thicker than a phone book, filled with every HOA bylaw, amendment, and state statute. She's bluffing, Margaret said, flipping through pages with surgical precision. Half these citations don't even apply to waterfront communities. She's hoping you'll panic. Don't. Then I called Sheriff Deputy Mike Santos, who had already seen Delilah's antics firsthand. He leaned back in his chair at the station, skimmed the letter, and smirked. These lawyers of hers are barking up the wrong tree. Unless the county zoning board signs off, this holds no water. And trust me, the county loves your marina. You generate tourism and tax revenue. She's just throwing punches in the dark. Finally, I called my own cousin, who happened to be an environmental compliance officer for the state. She laughed so hard when I read her the violations that she nearly dropped the phone. Tell Delilah to learn the difference between stored water runoff and dock pilings before she pretends to be an expert, she said. Armed with that knowledge, I felt steadier. The legal threats were smoke, not fire, but they also showed me Delilah's desperation, and desperation has a way of turning reckless. That night, I walked down to the docks alone. The marina was quiet, boats bobbing gently in their slips. I ran my hand along the railing, feeling the grooves worn smooth by decades of use. My father's boat sat at the far end, its reflection shimmering in the dark water. I thought about all the nights he and I had stood right here, him pointing out constellations while teaching me how to read tides. I thought about his laugh, deep and rolling, when I misjudged a knot and ended up with a tangled mess. And I thought about the promise I'd made at his bedside, that I'd protect his legacy, no matter the cost. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But as I watched the moon rise over Willowbrook shores, I realized something important. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My neighbors had found their voice, and together, we were stronger than Delilah ever imagined. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy thought that she had one last card up her sleeve, and knowing Delilah, it wasn't going to be pretty. Delilah's last card came faster than I expected. The following Friday, a pair of county inspectors showed up at the marina, clipboards in hand, saying they'd received an anonymous tip about unsafe pilings and hazardous fuel storage. I didn't need to guess who made that call. But here's the twist. Instead of finding violations, the inspectors found excellence. Captain Blackwood, my father, and later myself had maintained those docks with obsessive care. Fuel was stored in double-walled tanks, pilings reinforced, slip records spotless. By the time the inspectors were done, they were praising the marina as a model facility. One of them even asked for a slip recommendation for his brother's BOA. The report they filed publicly cleared the marina of every accusation. In fact, it praised Willowbrook Shores for its commitment to safe, affordable community boating access. The smear campaign was officially dead. Delilah, though, wasn't. She stormed into the community center that evening, demanding an emergency meeting. Her voice was shrill, brittle, the sound of a person losing grip on power. "You people are blind," she cried. "Can't you see what's happening? Property values will collapse. Outsiders will flood our shores. Everything we've built is in danger." But this time, no one applauded. No one nodded. Instead, it was little Sophie Morgan, yes, the same child who had once asked why Mrs. Delilah was so mean, who stood up from the front row. "You're the only one ruining our community," she said simply. Her small voice cut sharper than any adult's argument. The silence that followed was devastating. And then, like a wave breaking, the board voted, this time formally, on record, for Delilah's immediate removal as president. By unanimous consent, Captain Blackwood took the chair. The audience erupted in cheers so loud they rattled the windows. Delilah, red-faced and trembling, tried to shout them down, but Sheriff Santos was already waiting at the door. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I think it's time you stepped aside." And with that, Delilah Thornfield's reign ended. The weeks that followed transformed Willowbrook Shores. The marina reopened with even more support than before. Neighbors brought their boats, their children, their stories. A memorial plaque was placed at the entrance, honoring my father's legacy. His boat, paint faded but engine still steady, became a symbol of endurance, of heritage, of community. The new HOA board rewrote bylaws to emphasize cooperation over enforcement, turning the HOA from a weapon into a shield. They even created an annual AWA, bird in my father's name, recognizing neighbors who built bridges instead of fences. And me? For the first time in months, I felt the weight of grief lighten. Teaching children how to tie knots, helping veterans learn boat maintenance, watching families gather at sunset cookouts, I realized the marina wasn't just my inheritance. It was a gift to the entire community, a living legacy that no HOA president could ever erase. Delilah's glass palace was sold within weeks, her family scattered. Word spread quickly across other coastal neighborhoods about Willowbrook's rebirth. Some even asked me for advice on dealing with their own HOA tyrants. But that's their story. As for mine, on a calm Saturday morning, as the sun painted the horizon gold, I stood at the end of the dock beside my father's boat. The engine purred like it always had, steady and true. I closed my eyes, breathed in the salt air, and whispered the words I'd promised him in that hospital room. "Don't worry, Dad. The marina's safe. We're home." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.